On today's episode, I am going to be sharing all about why it's important to define culture with your students. Now, this podcast is called the Culture Centered Classroom. So, diving into and understanding the nuances of culture is a foundational element. On the very first episode of season 2, I defined the word culture like I went deep, okay? Went to great lengths to really deconstruct some of the myths around the idea of culture and to create a foundational understanding really for our conversation, not necessarily with the intention that students would listen to it, but I do think that your middle school and high school students could benefit from listening to that podcast episode as you start to frame the conversation for them about what culture is and how their culture impacts the way they show up in the classroom. So we know that understanding culture is not just important for educators, but it's also important for our students. However, I realize that starting that conversation can be intimidating. Knowing where to start can be overwhelming, confusing. There can be a lot of uncertainty around it. So this episode today is going to help you to understand why it's important to do this and share some of the benefits that you will see that your students will experience in the learning space. I believe that in a classroom where students are asked to observe and to read, to analyze, to process, to share, that it is incredibly important for them to understand the lenses through which they are doing these things. Those lenses are impacted by their culture. In this conversation of culture and lenses, it's important that there is a connection to and between the classroom norms, expectations, and individual student learning goals. This is important because by having students identify the lenses through which they view the world, you are allowing them to become aware of how their thoughts, perspectives, behaviors, beliefs, and ultimately the conclusions that they come to might be different from someone else's because of their lens. Your students are becoming aware of the unique nuances of their lived experiences. They are seeing how all of that impacts their thinking. The goal of doing that is to help students see that a different lens without further understanding and examination should not just be written off or deemed as bad or an incorrect lens. Now, awareness of some of their cultural beliefs and their lenses can be intimidating. So, in order for this to be most successful, the groundwork for creating an inclusive, welcoming, safe classroom for brave and collaborative learning has to be established. I highly encourage you to go back to the first few episodes of season 2, where I shared essential information about creating a welcoming and inclusive environment. These episodes are by no means exhaustive. Please know that. But they are a great place to start. And if you really want to dive in, like seriously, then let's hop on a 30-minute coaching call and really talk about the ways in which you are discussing culture and creating a culturally affirming lesson and environment for your students. So I'll make sure that I link that to, I'll put a link to the coaching call in the show notes below. Let's get to these benefits. So the very first benefit in discussing and defining culture with your students is in that it allows your students to develop as critical thinkers. What do I mean by critical thinking? Well, I looked in a couple of different places. I looked on a website called Oxford Learning Dictionary, Oxford Learners Dictionary. And this dictionary defined critical thinking as the process of analysis and analyzing information in order to make a logical decision about the extent to which you believe something to be true or false. I also looked up critical thinking in the Urban Dictionary. And in the Urban Dictionary, it says to be able to think outside of the box, to understand both sides of the argument fully, regardless of which side you're arguing from, to give you a full perspective of the whole dispute, hence enabling intelligent thinking, to be able to think for yourself without the influence of anything, to be able to make decisions and form your own opinions without any influence from anything else. Thinking for yourself and realizing when you are wrong and when you are right. So those are two different definitions of critical thinking, but I love them both. Like, seriously, how are we using and thinking about this phrase critical thinking? Because honestly, I think it's kind of become a buzz phrase. Like, every time we discuss high leverage practices and best practices, good teaching, we reference critical thinking. We want our students to be critical thinkers. We want them. What does that actually mean? What does that look like in practice? How do we successfully, effectively allow our students to be critical thinkers? So if we want our students to make logical decisions about what they believe to be true or false, well, they have to know what they already believe, because you are more likely to believe something is true if there's a foundation of truth that has been established inside of you, and you are more likely to believe it is false if there is a foundation of falsehood that has already been established, right? So understanding that you are going to be fighting against some of the foundational beliefs that you already have. How can we allow our students to have intelligent thinking and be able to fully understand both sides or multiple sides of an argument if they don't even know from which side they actually lean, right? Just because I am arguing for one point of view doesn't necessarily mean that that is the view that I'm most comfortable with. And so understanding where their foundational beliefs come from is critical when you are having them do critical thinking. Okay. So an example might be the religious lens. There are many different world religions where there is a belief, a truth that has been established around a God or a higher power, about an afterlife, a heaven or a hell. So students that are coming into your science classroom and they are learning about evolution or creationism, they are coming in with some foundational beliefs. A student that is agnostic or that is atheist is going to have one perspective that is different from a student that is coming in with a religious perspective that is based on the truth of God. So thinking about how students process information is not only important for you, but it's important for them. It's important for students to truly be aware of the lenses, the culture, the lived experiences that impacts the way that they process the information that is put in front of them, and the merit, right? So our culture oftentimes impacts the ideas that we're willing to accept or reject, right? The ones that we're willing to even entertain. And many times we don't even think about the fact that we're not willing to entertain something. We just don't. So, although students don't necessarily have to share all the aspects of their culture because they may not feel comfortable doing that, they don't have to share all the aspects of their culture that have influenced their lenses. It is still important for them to be aware of those lenses and of those influences. Critical thinking it's not about students reading something and taking it at face value. It's about wrestling with and questioning an idea. It's about leading with curiosity and wonder on a journey of discovery, of self-discovery, right? Students can intentionally ask the question, what am I learning about myself in this area? You know, I love my anchor questions. What am I learning about myself in this area? Now, as a disclaimer, I do want to say that allowing for true critical thinking can be challenging for teachers, for adults. You may say that you believe in the importance and the power of critical thinking, but when it actually comes time to have your students engage in that way, whoopsie, you feel the tension. You feel tension, you feel nervous. Why? This is the difference between who I think I am versus who I actually am. What I think I believe, what I actually believe. And I would encourage you to sit with that question, right? With the question, why? Why might allowing my students to engage in true critical thinking make me uncomfortable? Think about your own lenses. Think about what you have been taught, what you have been raised to believe. That's going to give you a greater understanding of that tension. But when we do allow our students to think about their culture and the lenses through which they are viewing the world, it allows for them to think much more critically, much more deeply about all of the topics that they are learning. The second benefit of defining culture with your students is it's found in allowing for a deeper level of discussion around topics. So not only are they thinking more deeply, but then they are also discussing more deeply. From the outpouring of their thoughts, students will begin to share. Another disclaimer, students will share most deeply, most honestly, most openly in a classroom that has been established as a safe space to bravely learn and share together. In these discussions, students can talk about how different lenses have influenced their beliefs and thoughts, as well as ask questions about their lenses and other lenses. You can ask additional questions. Now, if you're starting to feel another tension, if you're starting to feel some tension around the idea of this type of discussion happening in your classroom, I encourage you to reflect on your understanding of discussion and the purpose for discussion in the classroom. Your classroom, all the classrooms, and then also for the purpose of discussion in life beyond the classroom. I found a couple of definitions for the word discussion. So when I just typed it into Yahoo, it said that discussion is the action or process of talking about something in order to reach a decision or to exchange ideas. Merriam-Webster said that discussion is consideration of a question in open and usually informal debate. When students are aware of their lenses, then they can engage more fully and in a much more informed way in discussion, right? They are able to fully consider the question. But how can you fully consider a question when you're not aware of your lens? Many educators also like to use the Socratic method for discussion. I say, great, I love it. But what is it really? What are we really being asked to do when we use the Socratic method? Well, I looked up Socratic method and I found a really interesting blog article written by Michelle Fabio. In that article, it says that the Socratic method is named after Greek philosopher Socrates, who taught students by asking question after question. Socrates sought to expose contradictions in the students' thoughts and ideas to then guide them to solid, tenable conclusions. Not necessarily his conclusions, and that's me inserting that, right? But for them to understand, as the author adds, that this technique involves finding holes in their own theories and then patching them up. So we have to allow students to find holes in their understanding of thought, concept, beliefs, etc. But how can they do that when they don't really know what their beliefs are, when they don't really understand why they're thinking the way that they're thinking? They can't. So yeah, Socrates is saying, let's use the lenses. Okay, let's use the lenses. And I acknowledge that this can be scary stuff if your goal is to keep students believing a thing without question. And I'm taking a little pause there because there's that internal wrestling with, do we really, are we allowing students to think critically about all the things or only certain things that we don't want them to ask why, that we just want them to believe, to take this thing at face value? So again, I understand that there's a wrestling. Now let's keep moving on. The third benefit of defining culture with your students is in the building of empathy that happens as students share stories connected to their lenses. Inevitably, as your students are having discussion, they are going to be sharing some of their own stories as they connect to whatever it is that you're discussing. So if you're reading a novel in English class, they're going to share a story that connects them to the lens that they are using to understand and analyze a character. When you are talking about a mathematician or a scientist and their theory, the process that they went through to defend or to understand this certain concept, a student is going to connect to that process through a certain lens. And so as they're sharing these stories, empathy is going to be developed. Now, empathy is defined, according to Merriam-Webster, as the action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and vicariously experience the feelings, thoughts, and experience of another, of either the past or present, without having the feelings, thoughts, and experience fully communicated in an objectively explicit manner. So because you kind of have this foundational place of understanding, then you are able to connect to that experience. And as we are allowing our students to understand more of who they are and why they think what they think and believe what they think, then they are able to acknowledge the fact, and I would gather to say, accept the fact that there are multiple perspectives out there. And as they see their classmates' perspectives, people that they engage with on a daily basis, and say, oh my gosh, like, I like this person. We are friends. We are classmates, right? Like, we're engaging in this life, this thing called school together. But they've got a different experience. They've got a different perspective than me. How do I feel about that? So many times the word empathy is used talking about classroom norms, expectations, and rules, but how to actually develop empathy is not discussed as much. I can tell you from firsthand experience that this is a great way to build empathy in and between your students. Understanding is developed, and a desire to learn more is fostered. Walls of irrational and ignorant fear begin to fall with the understanding and the knowledge that is gained as students start to share stories, and they start to see that these experiences are connected to a real person, right? This is not just a fictional tale. This is a real person that they know and that they engage with every single day. Well, I think that's really all I need to say about that one. So as a recap, the 3 benefits to having your students define and understand culture so that they can understand the lenses through which they are viewing the world, but also the learning material that is placed in front of them, are that, 1, they become critical thinkers, like truly critical thinkers. The second benefit is that there is a deeper level of discussion that can happen in your classroom. And the third benefit is that empathy is also developed between your students. So I say cheers. Let's do all the things that allow us to help our students understand their culture so that we can see those three benefits happen in our classroom, really with every single lesson. But it's going to take time. It is a process. Like I said, if you would love help in understanding the best ways to define culture with your students, then let's hop on a coaching call, 30 minutes, and you and I can really hash out all the ideas that you have, and I can share with you some additional ideas that I have. We can talk about resources that will be most beneficial as you are helping your students to understand the word and the concept of culture and how it is connected to them. All right, my friend, I will talk to you next Wednesday.